So I'm Eric Johnson. I'm the Executive Vice President of Engineering at Gitlab. I've been here about 3 years, but the company has been all remote for about 8. So we've been doing this a long time, and happy to answer questions, but all remote in addition to remote planning after we get to the Q&A. But that's what I want to talk about with you first is how to plan remotely. So if you read the any how to implement Scrum book or blog, you're probably familiar with the planning meeting. It's basically where engineering and product management decide together what they're going to do in the next development period, however long that might be. And it's typically a 2 or 4 hour synchronous and in-person meeting. So it's quite a large investment in the development process. Since we've all gone remote, we've probably taken that same meeting in that same form and started doing it remotely. And you've probably already noticed it doesn't quite have that same feel when you get out of that in-person context. But I also want to challenge you and think it's not just because you're no longer in person anymore. It's also because you're still doing it synchronously, and synchronicity is quite expensive. And if you're not using asynchronous work, you're not realizing the full power of remote work, including teams distributed all over the globe and really flexible sort of working hours. So that's going to be my main theme, is to help you figure out ways to plan asynchronously as possible. Next slide, please. So I want you to design asynchronous workflows, not just for planning, but for everything. The key is to write everything down in artifacts. Also, let everybody comment and collaborate. I think we all get pretty clever with Google Doc permissions and whatnot, but try to get a culture where you're opening up everything editable by anybody in your entire organization. So anyone can comment, anyone can add their thoughts. But also define directly responsible individuals. So, our motto at GitLab is everybody can contribute, but how do you make sure something gets done? It's because you have one and only one person who's defined as the DRI, and they're the person making sure at the end of the day, if they have to break a tie or make a decision, they're doing it, and that's how you hit deadlines. So next slide. Did we miss one? Next slide. Anyway, it should say, okay, we skipped ahead of one, that's fine. So first, I want to back up a moment, and before we jump right into sprint planning, is challenge you to think, are you actually in the right gear? Are you in the right mode? So should you fix time or should you fix scope? If you're working on a new project or a new product, you've got to reach minimum viable product or MVP status before you can really provide any value to users. It's hard to deliver incremental value when you're in that mode. That's contrasted against mature products where you have a never-ending list of maintenance and features you need to deliver, but it's inversely very easy to deliver incremental value to users. So if your product is mature, you should probably be fixing time, and I'll talk about what that means. If you're developing the first version of a product, you should think about whether or not you want to fix scope. So what does that mean? So fixed time planning means you set a predetermined length of development time, like a sprint, 2 weeks, 4 weeks, whatever it might be. And the scope, or the amount that you can achieve in that time period, is an output. You have an idea, but you don't actually know. And most Scrum or Agile processes, they rely on these sprints, and you have prescribed ceremonies you're performing at the beginning, like the planning, or at the end with the retrospective or the demo or whatever. And 90% of you are probably using that mode, and that's great. That's probably the correct thing to do. The alternate mode, though, is fixed scope planning. So what this means is the requirements that you need to deliver are fixed, and the time is an output. And this is usually because you're delivering the first minimum viable product, and you just don't know how long that's going to take. But you can't really deliver any user value until that minimal amount exists. But while I say you're fixing scope, you're fixing it at the beginning. You do need to remain incredibly flexible throughout that time period, because you're going to learn as you go. The point is that you're working towards some kind of launch date, whether it's a marketing launch or getting it in front of customers for the first time. So Kanban is a handy tool for this because it's a big to-do list, and you continually prioritize it and you burn that down. I've also used a unique demo process at my last 2 companies that's well suited to fixed scope planning. My EA Christy is in the chat, and if she's there, she should be able to get you a URL that describes this process, but I'll share some screenshots and describe it briefly for you. So if we go to the screenshot of the demo scorecard artifact, the next slide. There we go. So if you follow the URL, you'll be able to read in depth about this. And I know it looks like an eye chart, but basically this is an artifact we call the scorecard. If you look at the rows are basically steps in a workflow that your user is going to follow. And it's usually an end-to-end workflow through the application, from logging in to, uploading their data, to getting it processed, to getting some artifact out of it, and then extracting that value from it. We've got it color coded here because typically there's different steps in a workflow. And so you might think of the colored groups of rows as epics and the individual lines as issues. You can put the issue links in here so it's unambiguous. What are we talking about for each one of these steps? But this is the script you go through as you're demoing the software. The rows, once you get past that fixed pane, the dated rows at the top, these represent scores from the dates that you gather or you record asynchronously. And demo. And you give each step a score. You define your scoring criteria, and you give each step a score as you go through this. And then it works kind of like a grade point average. You can total up the scores or average them, and then you can see your progress over time. And if we go to the next graphic, you can see what you can do with some of these numbers when you generate them. You're basically taking qualitative information and turning it to something that looks more like quantitative information. So I saw it blink up there, but then it disappeared. But we have a screenshot of basically a burn up chart. And you see for the total project, and then you can also do it by those color-coded areas or the main facets of the project. So you can make colored lines representing, well, this phase of the project, how is that done? Because typically some things are delivered before other things. It's useful to see that. So anyway, we'll get you the link, and then you can read that and use it to ask questions if you think it might be valuable to you. But moving on to the next topic, for planning asynchronously, it's really important that you document your priority and severity labels. So priority basically should represent when something needs to be done. Severity is related, but it's different. It represents the negative impact of a defect. So an example of how they can become decoupled is if you rebrand and you need to update your logo in your application, that'd be an example of a low severity but a very high priority issue to make. And I see Christy putting in links to Gitlab's defined priority and severity tables for our engineering org and also our entire open source project. Priority should carry an SLA, meaning a P1 comes through, you drop everything, you fix it immediately. P2 is usually same sprint or something like that. And that begs the question of, well, if we don't get to all the P2s, should they roll over and become P1s in the next sprint? And the answer is a really common insight. I'd urge you not to do that. You should only change priority when the actual priority has changed. Let the SLA be an output. And the reason for that is, as engineering leaders, we all want more headcount. We want more engineers, right? And so if you can show your leadership, hey, we've got defined priorities and we're routinely not getting to all the P2s in every sprint, they're spilling over into the next sprint. It's a very strong numerical argument that your team is undersized, and that's a good way to get additional headcount. So don't mess with priority and severity just because time has passed. The substance of priority and severity should have changed. So next graphic. So this is a really challenging one. I'm going to urge you to stop optimizing for predictability. So you may be in a mode where you're using t-shirt sizes, or I've used points a lot, like Fibonacci points in the past. More importantly, a culture of predictability unintentionally encourages conservatism. So there's really no way to approach predictability at the end of the day without taking on less and less over time. And I think we're all concerned with velocity and throughput. So I'd urge you to kind of stop the time investment you're making in estimation and see if you can get your organization focusing on throughput, meaning the volume of work that's happening in any given time period, and then compare time period to show progress. You might be tempted to track issues. In our case, we've learned it's more effective to track merge requests because that's the actual work that's happening. And in many cases, there could be a one-to-many relationship between issues and merge requests. So track the actual artifacts of work that are coming through. And Christy will link to a chart that we've got that represents what we call our merge request rate. It's basically throughput by another name. And you can see us going up and down, hopefully up over time. It's really important, though, don't emphasize individual metrics, because what you're going to do is you're going to decentivize team behaviors. If you make people feel like they're responsible for a number, they're going to be less apt to review someone else's code, and you want to make sure those behaviors are staying there. And the way we improve this metric is not by saying, hey, everybody, you got to do more. We actually focus on work breakdown or iteration, one of our core values. We coach our team to always be reducing scope, deliver the smallest possible units of value you can, and then you're going to see your productivity increase over time. And you might say, well, doesn't that sound like gamesmanship? It's possible, but reducing scope, shipping small things is a proven way to manage complexity. So it's actually sort of an anti-fragile failure mode of gamesmanship for this. People can game it all they want. They're going to end up being more productive. So we really encourage this mode. And you're going to get all that time you're spending in estimation back to write more code. So last slide. So this one happens to have the same title as the previous one. That's a bug. It should say monitor issue types and consider setting budgets. So to minimum, you should be monitoring the proportion of issue types that you're executing, the main types being features, bugs, and maintenance. And your quality or throughput metrics might tell you you're prioritizing the wrong things. So if you're looking at that, you can start to reprioritize in the next planning cycle. But to be planning async, it's sometimes helpful to set budgets. And you can say, okay, the engineering manager is going to be the DRI, responsible person for bugs and maintenance, and that's going to be 30% of the whole. The product manager is going to be the DRI for prioritizing features in that sprint. And then the two can work independently on most of the collective sprint plan and only have to come back together and do synchronous meetings between one another to resolve ambiguities or if it all doesn't fit in the box or something like that. So anyway, that's what I prepared today. But I'm happy to take questions about remote planning or remote work in general or anything.
Thank you, Eric. I'm here to ask questions on behalf of the audience, so appreciate you sharing your knowledge there. This first one we have from Mozamo Hakwe. I'm not sure if I pronounced that right. Do you have a cooldown period after major deployments, like after delivery of a sprint? Do you take a few days off and focus on engineering priorities or technical debt, instead of product priorities, or how do you navigate that?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I like the instinct because you do have to balance, like I said, maintenance, features, and bugs, but we don't do a cooldown period. We basically say, GitLab culture, we've released every month on the 22nd of every month for, I think, 6 years straight. Wow. And so we just want that rhythm of delivery happening. But that does force us to, within that monthly release, that's essentially our sprint period, we've got to make sure we're prioritizing the appropriate amount of availability, security work, maintenance, bugs, and features. But we fit it all in and don't cool down. I will say, though, at our scale, I've got about 550 people on my team. And so, when you're talking about that scale, you can always have some people that are taking a little bit of a break and some people are working harder, and it averages out. If you've got a smaller team, doing what was described in the question might be smart to kind of, if you're running a 5 or 50 person team, maybe it's useful to take that sort of collective deep breath and then get back to it.
Makes sense. Have you, this is from Alex Sue, have you encountered issues with teams becoming silos because they don't have a need to interact with other teams? And if so, what strategies can you recommend to prevent that kind of culture?
Yeah, so I have, not a GitLab. I mean, GitLab's unique. We're an open source project, and most open source projects are a single code base. So we're monolith, right? And so you're always bumping into other people in the same code. We do have sort of a functional layout. So we have like teams organized by the functionality they provide. And for the most part, that maps to areas of the code. But there's always things like navigation and settings and whatnot where different teams are touching the same code. And so we're always naturally coming into contact with one another. But I have experienced that at other companies. My previous company was a drone company, and we had avionics, we had flight controls, we had desktop software, iOS software, machine learning, a cloud platform, and we did see those sort of natural silos develop. And the demo process that I talked about briefly before, and the URL will be in the chat so you can read more deeply about it, it was actually developed specifically to break those silos down. And so we found flight controls would work on their algorithms, the firmware team would work on their stuff. They both have a successful sprint, and at the end of the sprint, we do the build, and things wouldn't line up, like APIs and interfaces had changed. And so the demo process forced us to continually integrate things, not from like a CI perspective, but from a higher level kind of user perspective. And it did a dramatic job of solving that. So I'd say the more complex your platform, the more benefits you'll see from a demo process.
Makes sense. This one's from Carl Schmidt. Are any recurring meetings or your thoughts on stand-ups daily or at a different cadence, or asynchronous chat stand-ups? What's your thoughts and philosophy behind those things?
Yeah, we don't do, this is one of those things that we don't standardize at GitLab, so managers are kind of free to do whatever they want. I'd say probably about half do stand-ups. However, it's very strongly embedded in our culture that we have a responsibility, because we're so global. We got people in India and Australia and North America and Europe and Africa and Asia, to not like the default way you design something should be asynchronous, and we fall back to synchronous work like meetings when asynchronous is not working for us. Because if we do that, it becomes very difficult to collaborate globally, and that hurts diversity and a number of other things. So most of the stand-ups that happen, I believe, are Slack bots. And that's a good way to kind of, get that accountability, a start to the day, but not require that everybody's awake and on Zoom at the same time having a synchronous conversation.
So I have a follow-up question to that, just from myself. Like, when I reflect on the efficiency that comes from that, it totally makes sense. One of the concerns that I have is some of the, for lack of better words, sort of like the empathy or reading between the lines, or, if people are having challenges that you might not be able to interpret from text, but you might be able to see like through a webcam. How do you navigate that when your primary, means of communication is asynchronous?
Yeah, I mean, I've worked remotely at GitLab now for 3 years. I did it for 3 years 2 companies ago. That was a very much on-premise culture. I was the only remote one, and that was really hard. And I felt that, I'd go to a meeting, they'd forget about me. I'd have to chat someone to remind them to turn on the video conferencing system. And then they were all laughing about some inside joke from lunch, and they'd forget to look at the screen. And that was just sort of life. Side note, don't try to do the hybrid remote thing. Go for all remote. Even if some people are located in the same office, have them, one screen, one face, have them zoom in as if they were in separate physical spaces. But anyway, my experience of coming to GitLab was first 2 weeks, there was the switching cost, and I missed that sort of like the micro gestures and the reading between the lines sort of thing. But after about 2 weeks, it just sort of evaporated, and I realized to some extent, or to a large extent, it was sort of a crutch. Yes, that is a valid stream of information you get, but you can do without it. And after about 2 weeks, the fact I was on Zoom in my home office in front of a screen all day long, it just kind of faded into the background, and I started to forget about it. And a unique sort of GitLab experience is going to one of our fairly infrequent in-person synchronous events, like our employee conference or maybe one of our user conferences or something like that. And you meet someone for the first time in person, and you don't realize it, or you have this light bulb goes off. It's like, can this really be the first time we've actually met in person? Like, I feel like I know you. I feel like we've worked together for years. And that's why I say the in-person office sort of interactions can become a crutch, and you can develop really strong personal relationships. You become attuned to someone burning out or being unhappy or needing help over this sort of different channel. But you do have to kind of cross the chasm. You have to kind of let the past go and push through that initial period of discomfort, and then it feels quite natural.
I've definitely heard from others that, choosing between having a fully remote culture or having a almost no remote or like kind of fully in-person culture, that like you get a lot of benefits by choosing one or the other. But when you try to do a hybrid model where there's one individual kind of on the sidelines, you get a little bit of that, like, missing the inside jokes and missing kind of the stuff that's happening in person, even sometimes like microphone quality issues and stuff like that. So, it's an astute point. It is fascinating to me that you've been able to kind of let that fade into the background and be able to still be, able to communicate effectively without some of that reading between the lines. And I imagine some of that is just, when you have trust with your team, right? Some of that stuff may not be as necessary. So question here from Kareem Varela: how do you keep remote engineers motivated and accountable?
Yeah, well, I would say I would chalk this up to sort of engineering culture to a large part. The best way you can influence your culture, first and foremost, is by who you hire. So really run you cannot invest enough time in hiring is what I would say, and really figure out ways you can assess for that. So ask people questions during the interview process, like, what are you really passionate about? Like, what are you most proud of in your past job? And make sure the person is energized by unknowns and solving problems and the work that they've created. And so select for it is kind of the first answer. In day-to-day, I'm a big fan of Dan Pink's book, Drive. You can download the book. It's an easy read. There's also a YouTube video by RSA Animate that explains basically the whole thing in about 18 minutes. So Google that. But basically he says, there are three things that motivate knowledge work. One is the opportunity to master a craft. The other is autonomy, meaning not just being told what to do, but having a say in what it is you're doing. In other words, letting engineers influence the sprint plan. That's why I say everybody should be able to contribute to something like that. And then the last is purpose. Like if you're working on some problem, hopefully you love it because you got into engineering because you like creating algorithms and solving little problems. But sometimes you're working on a problem you don't necessarily like. But if you'll be motivated to do that, even if it doesn't have intrinsic motivation, if you can connect it to some grander arc of meaning connected to the company, like the company's success. I may not like bumping versions or something like that in NMR, but if I know in some way, shape, or form this provides value to users, it makes the company more successful, it's not something where I'm going to drag my feet or procrastinate.
Makes a ton of sense. I have for myself what I call like the happiness triangle, which is just kind of, I don't know, it's probably from a lot of therapy or something, but having pleasure at work, meaning and purpose, and then good mood is kind of these three pillars of maintaining like productive, happy, life at work. And you touching on the meaning and purpose side resonates a ton for me. I reflect on, one of the things that I found has been useful as well is when you have engineers that are kind of disconnected, that, bringing them into user study to watch, real people use the product and succeed and or fail at the product can be another means to create that.
Having them talk to customers is a great one. Or if you're doing UX research, having them take part in user studies, yeah, great suggestion.
Totally. Last question. This one is from Chris Cohen. Do you sacrifice predictability by focusing on productivity at the expense of estimation?
Yeah, so great question. If you're not optimizing for predictability, how do you provide that back to your executive team, to big enterprise customers that want to know when that feature is going to land? Or in the starkest sense, what if you have a revenue recognition problem? What if you need to deliver some feature that actually affects your bucks? So I say don't optimize for predictability, but doesn't mean you're not getting more predictable. So if you focus on iteration, you focus on throughput, and you incentivize those team behaviors, you'll find yourself get more predictable over time as an output, not an input. But if you make predictability an input, you will slow down. And then, of course, you'll feel predictable because you can predictably deliver things when you promise them. However, you're not going to be delivering a whole lot, and that's a separate problem from predictability itself. So don't optimize for it, but by all means, you should expect to see your organization become more predictable if you're focusing on iteration and throughput and agile development, best practices, team behaviors.
Excellent. Well, Eric, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to share your wisdom in all its forms with everybody. I know that we're greatly appreciative. So, hope to see you in the future in the Plato community. And with that, I say thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Good to see you again, David.
Awesome.